All right, the 160th day of class, and we're going to talk about the end of the Cold War. And I have four happy stories to end over 4 decades that were pretty challenging by any measure. And just to let you know a little bit about myself, I graduated high school in 1992, and I think that gives me a little bit of a unique perspective on the Cold War. So let me take you through my high school years. 89, Berlin Wall falls. 1990, Germany reunifies. 1991, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, that's what START stands for, and the end of the Warsaw Pact happened. And then senior year, the Soviet Union ends, and it was a crazy time to be alive, but a very cool time to be alive, to see the world change this quickly. Now, let me give you some evidence to how quickly the world did change. Now, I got this book from the Friends of the Library, and I bring it home, and my daughter was very young. She was a toddler. And we open it up, and we start reading it, and on the insert, there was a page that required 3 stickers to be put into the book. And as you can see here, it says, "You can change the world." On October 3rd, 1990, after this book was printed, East and West Germany, which had been 2 separate countries for almost 50 years, were unified as one country, the Federal Republic of Germany. By placing the sticker of the new unified Germany over the map of West Germany on page 15, you can change the world. And then you had to do the Brandenburg Gate here, and then you had to put a blank map on Germany. The world moved so fast that the books had to have stickers in it. And here's some more evidence to the point. Hit songs on the radio. I mean, not just obscure songs that were constantly being played on the radio that sounded like social studies class. This one was called The Wind of Change. It was about the things changing in Europe, and Jesus Jones is right here, right now. And you can see the background of the music video. It looks like social studies class. You have Poland, the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia. That was what the time was like. It was a cool time to go through high school, and the world was changing that quickly. And I want to tell you 4 stories that preceded my high school years. Well, one of them was at the very beginning of my high school years. One is the Solidarity movement in Poland. The second is Glasnost and Perestroika in the USSR. The third is Vaclav Havel's Velvet Revolution, and then the fall of the Berlin Wall. And again, positive, happy stories, and I remember all 4. Now, Lekwaleza, and I'm sure I mispronounced it. I've heard it pronounced a bunch of different ways, and my Polish isn't very good. And by not good, I mean non-existent. But he founded a movement called Solidarity. And this was the Soviet bloc's first independent trade union. Now, he was an electrician, and he wanted a decent wage, a fair wage. You can't do that in communism. And he banded his union brothers together, and they forged this union. And he paid the price. I mean, he was put under a surveillance, and he was put in jail a bunch of times. But eventually, after the martial law in Poland, the people rose up, and Poland got rid of communism. And again, it's one of those things in history, when it happens to one, things spread. So if it can happen in Poland, it can happen here, was the thinking people went on. So he leaves the jail cell. He leaves being a target of the government to becoming the president. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1983. And here's the cover of Time magazine from 1981, or 1980, excuse me, December 1980, shaking up communism. And there he is, Lech Walesa, the man who did it. So in the end, the people, the worker, rose up against the communist regime, and they won. So things are moving up in a positive direction. Now, in 1985, a man named Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the USSR. And he ushered in these 2 major changes. The first one is called Glasnost, or openness. And the second is called Perestroika, restructuring. So what we saw happen during these times was the USSR, which was very closed to the world. As Churchill, remember the enigma wrapped into the riddle? And that's what they were. And all of a sudden, you see McDonald's and Levi's showing up in Moscow, and the inviting American musicians to play in Russia. I remember vividly my junior year of high school, a group of my classmates went over to the USSR, and that was a big deal. That was a huge deal at the time, and kind of wish I was on that trip. I was not. But they came back with all sorts of stories. Essentially it was a different world, and people were very intrigued by them because most of them have never seen an American and that kind of thing. So again, glasnost, openness. Come on by. We're open now. We're instead of being that closed Russia of the past. And perestroika. We're going to restructure what we have now away from communism, that gradually moved further and further away from communism. Now, the third story is Vaclav Havel's Velvet Revolution, and I think he's the only poet I can think of in world history as a leader. I can't think of another poet leader right now. Now, I know Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher. We've had some writers and some philosophers, but a true poet, Vaclav Havel, he was a dissident. He fought against the communist regime, and he paid the price for that. I mean, they persecuted him pretty good, and he served time in jail. But eventually, he becomes the leader of Czechoslovakia, and he led the split into two different nations. Once the Slovaks got their independence from the Czech Republic. And he used his writing skills to critique communism, and the people, loved him for that. And he used his diplomacy, and he used his eloquence, and he used the pen, and he used peace as a tool to lead a revolution that could have been very ugly, civil war, bloody, the whole 9 yards. But it wasn't like that because of his leadership. And I think this quote summarizes who this man was, Vaclav Havel. Truth and love must prevail over lies and hatred. And he passed away in 2011, one of my personal heroes. And then November 9th, 1989, the world would never be the same again. And I remember watching this vividly. I think the world was watching this. And the party went on and on and on. The celebration where East and West Germany came together, and the tearing down of the wall, the symbol of the Cold War. And it became very apparent to me, I'm going to make it personal because I remember it and finally in a part of history that I was a part of. There was a sense that kind of the good guys won. And it's not that cut and dry, but we felt that democracy and capitalism and the way we were living as Americans was triumphing over Russia. And I'm fully aware that I was taught to dislike Russia and communism, but at the time I felt the good guys had won. And in a sense, it's somewhat true now. Although some nations remain communist, a lot of nations gradually became more democratic and more capitalistic and this sort of thing. And it was a joyous event. People were coming together after so many decades, and the singing and the music, David Hasselhoff aside, it was a fantastic day to be alive, to see that. It was fantastic. And to end this Cold War, I think I'd be remiss to not talk about these two at the end. And this is fairly controversial, and people see this differently. But President Reagan, when he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," that was the toughness, this brinkmanship, this, going to the brink of fighting, showing that we're tough, not backing down, and then détente, this smoothing out. And I think these two men rode that very difficult Cold War seesaw between brinkmanship and détente. And eventually, during their tenure, we see the Cold War. And so I think you have to attribute the ending of the Cold War. You have to attribute some of it to Reagan and to Gorbachev. And I'm glad we are no longer living in that era. And I wanted to end on a positive note. And going back, the Cold War ending with the fall of the Berlin Wall, fantastic ending to a very, very difficult chapter in history. So thank you for watching.